This episode is produced on the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and importantly, emerging leaders of tomorrow. Welcome to this episode of the Unsexy Truth, striving to be the #1 mental wellness podcast for the sole purpose of normalizing life's difficult conversations. I am your host, Waiteaweawe, and I want to thank you for tuning in this week and every week to help make that possible. So this is the very first episode of the Unsexy Truth. And admittedly, this particular chat that I'm going to have with you today wasn't the one that I originally had planned. And I really did mull over whether or not I wanted to share this, because it's firstly a personal story, but also it's a personal perspective. And a lot of the times what we say, how we show up, a lot of that can be filtered through other people's lenses, other people's perspectives. And for this particular episode, because it's a personal viewpoint and personal to myself, obviously, I really was hesitant to share it. But the reason I created this podcast, The Unsexy Truth, was with the purpose and aim of normalizing really difficult conversations. Because I feel as though when it comes to things that are happening in our everyday life, we can be bogged down with that experience. And the problem with that is that we don't move forward. We stay stuck listening to the same stories or cycles or loops over and over and over again in our heads. And when we're in that stuck state, moving forward is impossible in that moment in time. And sometimes it really is as simple as communicating, obviously, but really just sharing what's going on. And when we let that feeling or let that story go, what happens is that we're now better placed to be in a position to actually start to make good choices, to take action, to move forward and not stay stuck in that story, in that feeling, in that emotion. So I have to put my money where my mouth is, right? And whilst it is, I don't know if it's difficult, we'll unpack that in a moment, but these are the sorts of conversations that are difficult. And so, in order to normalize it, being open and sharing is part of the solution. So what I'm going to unpack for you today, I've broken this particular episode up into two eps, so this one and then a following one. And there's a reason for that. The topic itself, which I'll get to, is quite heavy. And I realize that there are going to be people who may be triggered by what I say, may be triggered by my perspective. And whilst the aim, the mission, the purpose of this podcast is to normalize difficult conversations, what I haven't designed it to do is to leave us feeling worse for having arrived and listened. So that's not my goal. If you feel in any way triggered, please switch me off. It's just as simple as that. You don't need to move forward or carry any of that, whatever with you. So just switch it off and move on. Episode 2, I do feel is worth listening to because it's about systems and tools that I use to help navigate from how I was feeling. So look, without further ado, because the punchline was, what am I going to be talking about? I'm going to be talking about my personal experience, my story, my perspective, however you want to frame it, around the recent referendum vote here in Australia. And when I say recent, just sort of over a month ago. So for those of you who may not be familiar, and you wouldn't be familiar if you don't live in Australia, or you're like me and not really watching the news, I'm going to read specifically what the referendum vote was about. So I'm just going to read this. So it was a proposed law to the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Now, there are components which, anyone can jump on, Google it. You'll be able to see what that actually meant. I don't want to get into the political side of it because we'll just get lost down the rabbit hole. And honestly, whilst I educated myself on the topic, I am not an expert on the political component, and that's not what this episode is about. It is, again, about my perspective, my story, and how I, as firstly, an Indigenous person myself, secondly, as someone who is from minority communities, interpreted the outcome and how that felt. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. So again, it's a bit of a heavy topic for myself personally, but really it's just heavy in the talking about it. I've since moved forward because I've had to. So I think it's only fair that I cover a few things. I want to give you a little bit of context and background, where I grew up, and then obviously sort of that can set some context or set the scene to give you an idea around, why this is quite a personal journey, despite the fact that I am not Indigenous to this country. So I moved to Australia with my mother. I was 6 years old and I grew up here. I have been back to New Zealand, so that's my native country. I'm New Zealand Māori. I have been back home, obviously not only for holidays, but I've been back home. I spent 6 years at home doing further study I'm showing my age now, in 1999 I moved back, and the reason that I returned back home there's a lot of different reasons, but the main reason that I came home was because my mother was ill and my sister needed a hand in her care. So I have a very much an Australian story or upbringing as a migrant, which I never really thought of myself as a migrant because New Zealand and Australia were so close. We're like, cousins, so to speak. And so I never really saw myself the way I might have seen others who travelled further. So I came with Mum. I was 6 years old. We landed in Sydney, and we spent the first couple of years in Sydney itself. And so Sydney at the time, we're talking about the mid-80s, was, if anyone, is familiar with Australia during that time, I think the way I can recall it, obviously there's so many good things, but it really, really was kind of I don't want to say that. It was very different to the environment that I came from. So I've come from small town country, New Zealand, to big city. And when Mum arrived, for whatever reason, we ended up, I know why, but she ended up losing all of her life savings. Just one of those freak things that happens to people. We were sitting at a bus stop in Bondi. Beautiful bus. I can picture it clear as day, mostly because it's probably one of the most beautiful bus stops I've been to, even now. So Bondi overlooking, there's a bus stop. and my mother and I were sitting at the bus stop waiting for the bus. We'd been there a while. I remember the feeling. We'd been there a while. And just before the bus had come, a lady came down and sat next to us. And for whatever reason, Mum had been distracted. And what transpired is that lady stole Mum's purse. But inside Mum's purse, because this is what you did back in the 80s, she had her life savings. So it was close to $30,000. Now, $30,000 back in the 80s was a lot of money, right? So her bag was stolen. And how our life kind of transpired after that was as a result of really that incident. And I'm sure, you know, if I were to unpack that even further, things happen for a reason. I haven't really delved into that, but what transpired was that we stayed. And from what I understand, you know, family back home said, oh, you should come back home, which would have been the easy choice. But of course, my mother, like myself, didn't make the easy choice. And so we proceeded to stay in this country. Mum had nothing. And it really was a hard life. And for me, I didn't, you don't know any different as a child. But I know now as an adult looking back at the choices that she made, Jesus, sorry, Lord, she made a really tough call to not only stay, but to stay with a 6-year-old child with no money and figure it out. And figure it out she did. So first couple of years, we lived in Sydney. Mum was, you know, doing odd jobs, and I enrolled in school and thus began our life here in Australia. Now, whilst I call myself Y because that is my name, my full name is Waitukaro. So mid-80s, I look different to everyone else. Everyone else's name is Sally or Rachel or Laura or Chris or, you know, Nick. I can't remember any of these names, but you get the gist. So mid-80s, Sydney. My name is Waitukaro. I start school, and that thus really starts my journey about learning what different is. And it's not something that I've really unpacked in its entirety, but if you can imagine, you know, young child, new country, living with her mother, single mother, no money, look different to everyone else, sound different to everyone else, and of course, my name's Waitukaro. And back then, you didn't abbreviate your name, and I wouldn't even think to abbreviate my name because that's my name. So my existence those first few years was, I'm not going to say they were hard. I didn't know any different. But as a result of later years and choices that I made, obviously fitting in was one of the challenges that we all and all children go through, irrespective of your name. It is just a little bit different if you've got all these other variables to consider, you know. So the challenges that I went through were really fitting in but never fitting in, if that makes sense. And my mother did a lot of moving, so I went to a lot of schools, so we didn't stay in the one spot. We travelled around the east coast of Australia, up to Queensland, back to New South Wales, then eventually came south to Victoria. Settled in Melbourne initially, but then moved out to Geelong. Spent some time in Geelong, a couple of years over there, and then ended up in country Victoria in a town called Mildura, which is on the border of New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, and I'm guessing Northern Territory to an extent, because it's literally a border town. So here I was, this is still the 80s, late 80s at this time, small country town, looking different to everyone else, sounding different to everyone else. And by this time, we'd shortened my name, which still didn't help. I joke about it now, but my name's Y. It's a letter of the alphabet, and yet people still get it wrong, which makes me laugh. I don't care. I've got no attachment to that. It is what it is. If I were to sort of get, what do you call it? If I were to get attached to people getting my name wrong, which I don't know if I ever did feel that way. I know that people do, but honestly, by my age, there comes a point where you just get over it. And I built that bridge whenever I did, and I got over it. My experience really was just interpreting, what was happening around me, the different environments, the things that I've seen. And I've seen a lot of different things. And honestly, one day I will write a book. But for now, I really had a colourful childhood that was very textured, that had so many different layers. And a lot of those layers and a lot of those memories, and again, when you're living through it, you don't know any different. But there was poverty, and as a result of the poverty, then where we lived and the environments that we lived in, from refuges through to, where we lived, the types of jobs mum had to take to survive, all of those beautiful layers obviously formed the person that I am today. But with that really has shaped my perspective, and my ability to see people and the environments that I'm in. And a lot of that's probably emotional EQ too. But I figured out along the way very early, obviously being different myself, what different looked like. And because I lived in so many different environments, from, the hustle and bustle of a city like Sydney through to country town Mildura, Ballarat, Geelong, it's very, very different environments. But the one common denominator was that I was clearly different. I was a bit of a loner, still am to an extent. But within that, and seeing how other people not only treated me, but treated others, was something I picked up very early on. And I don't know how old I was off the top of my head when I started to see and understand that the Australian Aboriginal people, there was a lot of, I don't even know how to describe it in a way that's kind. So, I can feel myself filtering myself even now, filtering what I'm saying, filtering how I'm thinking, how I'm going to interpret it for other people. But the truth is that and I'm going to include myself in this for so many different reasons, but I think it's best because I'm not part of that community that I really just include myself in the community that I grew up with. But people have such an abysmal viewpoint of our indigenous people here in Australia at the time. I don't know if a lot's changed. If I'm being honest with you, I'd probably say not. And I can, right? That's probably going to annoy some people, but whatever. I speak from experience. I speak because I see it, and I speak because I understand. So people, one, have an abysmal viewpoint of our indigenous people here in this country, people as a result of very, very racist, especially the timeframes that I'm talking about. Although I didn't know that, I just thought that was normal. I knew it wasn't right because I'm not, I'm a child, but I'm not in any way stupid. I grew up with the mother that I had, and so had a very worldly upbringing. So I knew that I'd figured out pretty early on that, wait a minute, if I'm here and everyone else is here and they're there, okay, there's something awry, So it's not rocket science to realize that. And I'll get into this a little bit further on down the track, but when you are yourself part of a minority, you just see everyone. You don't see different, or I didn't see different because I wasn't brought up to see different, but you feel it most definitely. So here I am, figured out pretty early on that there's a pecking order. That pecking order still exists. Again, controversial, it's the truth. So pecking order still exists. And I figured out that this is a lower common denominator than where I'm sitting. And this is a personal viewpoint that I share that I wouldn't share with many people. Now I'm sharing it with everyone. Go figure. In realizing that, one of what naturally happens and what I've observed through, again, growing up here, is that if you're a minority, and in order to fit in, it's actually easier to just agree with the crowd, to agree with everyone else, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to fit in. And by agreeing, or what you're doing is you're actually deflecting. You're deflecting the attention from yourself somewhere else. And there's only one somewhere else, and that somewhere else is there. And so you naturally find yourself doing that. Now, I can say this wholeheartedly. I know of only one occasion, maybe two, and I'll put context into that, 2 occasions where I know that I actively made a choice to do that. First occasion, little girl, wouldn't have been 10 years old, friend, see her family, see her dad. I don't know who else was there. There was definitely someone else, but I see a friend from school. She sees me. I'm on the other side of the mall. They're at the bakery at the shop. And I don't know what I'm doing, probably playing in the park. Small town. We lived just off the main street above the shops. And I see one of the girls from school, who's obviously in this scenario, an Aboriginal girl. I can't remember her name. And she waved at me, and I pretended, even though she knew I saw her, that I didn't see her. And that was my first experience of joining in the status quo. The second isn't really the same, but what I've come to learn is by choosing to opt out of the conversation. I chose over the years growing up to opt out of the conversation because it was easier to do that. It was easier to not cause conflict or get emotional, because I'd get emotional. It was easier to say nothing, to not even participate in the conversation than to participate. And I thought actually that was the right thing to do. Now, obviously, in hindsight, I'm like, actually, by opting out, I'm in essence enabling that to continue. Life is so beautiful. It presents us with great lessons. And those are just mine, and I'm honest about it. So growing up as a minority, especially in this country, obviously, because I'm not from here. Growing up, my viewpoint was what I was observing. Now, behind closed doors, my mother was a very spiritual person, and so it was a really stark contrast to what existed out in the real world at home. Very spiritual, just how I was raised. I'm so grateful. I had such a beautiful, textured childhood. There were a lot of things that were, in hindsight and upon reflection, sad, but that wasn't my perspective at the time. At the time, I feel I had this beautiful childhood. It's just that when I left my house, the safety net of that was the reality of what happens when we leave our homes. I think that's one of the sad things about social media these days is that, children growing up now, those hardships follow you home. Bullying, yeah, it existed, but you at least got to go home and shut the door and you were safe. Whereas now that doesn't exist. That line's blurred, So, so, this is my experience in my childhood, understanding other people's viewpoints, how people felt in this country at the time, how they still feel. And then obviously my upbringing, which was a really beautiful spiritual upbringing, is all I can say. If you ever met my mother, you would know she was amazing. Yes, life was tough, but life's tough. I get it now. She raised me to be very strong, independent. I'm going to say kind because I feel I'm kind. I can be unkind, but very strong, independent, intelligent. Yeah, she raised me to be the person that I am essentially when I'm not being all the other layers of the human existence. So anyway, the reason why I wanted to share that is to really just give you context about this sort of layered, upbringing that I had, the person that I am, the background. I'm Māori. I grew up as if I was back home. My mother raised me with all of the foundational values and all of the values that I would have received even if I'd grown up back home. The only difference is that I wasn't raised to speak Māori. That wasn't done. That's another topic. Same sorts of things happen back home. That's why I'm familiar with them. But a lot of the experience that I have is also a generational trauma. And I won't go down that alleyway now, but I really just want to give people context into the feeling and why my perspective and why the outcome of the referendum vote impacted me the way it did. And there's a couple of things that I want to share. I'm just going to read through my notes. Firstly, I'm in a position to not allow things to impact me for so many reasons. But my lifestyle now is quite a spiritual lifestyle. And so to be impacted by these outside influences or these events or this trauma really, in essence, shouldn't have happened. And I knew when I saw the outcome of the referendum that I was okay that everything that I was feeling was not necessarily my own feeling, but I allowed myself to sit in that. And the things that arose as a result of that was I actually got quite sick mentally, spiritually, physically. Trauma for myself, and this is a well documented experience for people. I'll throw a name out there. If you're familiar with them, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you're not, by all means, fascinating human being, Dr. Gabor Mate, one of the foremost thought leaders on trauma, on childhood trauma, and the impacts that it has on our physical body. Completely fascinating. So anyway, fast forward through that bit. But I'm well aware of how things can impact you, and I'm well aware of how not to let those things. But I'm also human. And the part about being human is that we get choices, and sometimes we indulge in those choices, and I definitely indulge. And episode 2 is going to be about the recovery process, what happened, and then the recovery process. Today is about sharing the perspective, and this is the bit that I want to get to. The reason why it impacted me so personally is, one, I can relate. I am an indigenous person myself, so I'm from minority communities. So I'm familiar not only with the why from, a cultural perspective, but I understand the why. You don't need to explain to me or others what this vote was about. We all got it. The only people who missed the memo was everyone that was looking at the politics. Now, I've had lots of different conversations around the political component. The thing is, when you're trying to tell people a story about, why they should vote yes, and they're stuck in this dialogue about politics or politicians. Don't even get me started on that. The problem with that is that I understand it, firstly. So, and I'm not going to talk about politics because I'm not an expert, and who cares? So many people talking about the political side. So I don't care about that because I understand what this vote was about. I don't need to get lost in talking about the political side. Yeah, okay, I get it. Yes, all right, it's not clear, or it's not this, it's not that, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to move that over there for a second. Move it to the right. In Indigenous cultures, and it's easy for me to talk about my own, but I know, whilst I'm not well versed and stand to be corrected by any of the aunties or uncles, please, or cousins, please correct me. But in Indigenous cultures and in Māori culture, and from what I understand about, I don't want to say all, but Indigenous cultures, is that our language is not written down. The language is passed on through. Language is passed on from generation to generation. I was going to say it in Māori, from our ancestors. Each generation passes on the stories of what happened, of our whole existence. So it's passed on through a voice. Voice to Parliament. makes so much sense. These messages, our story, our language, who we are, is passed on verbally. It is not written down. Now, of course, in today's day and age, with technology, there's nuances. Things are changing. People are documenting, but we're not documenting in the same way that Western civilization documents things. And the reason being is because these stories are retained still by the generations, the older generations that are still with us. And those stories were passed on by their not only parents, grandparents. And the way it was taught, and I'm reflecting upon Māori culture here, was that you had to be present, you had to be around. So you would generally attend the marae and you would be listening to the stories that are shared by all the people that are in those communities or all the people that visits those communities. So you're getting a history lesson. Now, no one is sitting there writing that history lesson down. You have to actually be present to get that information. And then that information is retained. Lord knows how. It's retained. And then those stories are weaved into the fabric of that person and passed on to the other generations. So if you can imagine, language, history, it's a beautiful tapestry of language. But you have to be present to receive that tapestry, to receive that taonga or gift as it would be in English. So if you're not present, it's as if it's lost. It is lost. There's so many different reasons, and that's another episode why Māori culture is so strong. There are a lot of people, generations, that fought to keep that language, to keep those stories, to pass those stories on. And one story that I was privy to here when I met one of the aunties here in Melbourne at an event that I went to. I don't know if it's an event. Well, anyway, it was a Māori event. But we had the privilege of being taken up to what is known as where the 1,000 Steps is, taken up to that area of Melbourne in the Dandenongs and to hear the stories. And from what I understand, and it's so limited, I'm so embarrassed by this. I'm so embarrassed I grew up in this country. I know absolutely nothing about it. Is that back in the day when an Aboriginal person from one area went to another area, the way they would be welcomed by someone from the other tribe was they would be recognized and say, I see you. And then that person would say, where they're from. And then that exchange would happen. It's very much similar in Māori culture, whereas when I go and meet people, when they're asking you your name, they're not asking you, they're asking you your name, but they're asking you who you are and who your people are. And then honestly, is one of the most amazing things to witness if you ever get an opportunity to travel to New Zealand and you get to experience it with a local, with a Māori person, and to go to the marae and to sit down with one of the elders. They will interweave the stories that they were present in hearing, and stories that were passed on to them into the conversation, and they will connect all the dots about how they know you. I'm getting to the punchline, I promise. They will connect the dots. And what's happening is that they're recognizing who you are, where you come from, and you hear stories that you would never otherwise hear. And the voice to Parliament is about that. It is about saying, I see you, I hear you, you exist, your language exists, your ancestors exist. I don't know how to make it any simpler than that. It is literally as simple as that. We see you, we hear you. It's called the voice to Parliament for a reason. It's not about just having a voice. It's about saying that we recognize you, that you exist. We see you. And a no vote does the complete opposite. It says you don't exist. That's what that means to me. That's what that means to any Indigenous person. We don't see you. You don't exist. That beautiful tapestry that I tried to share with you, it's like vapor. Just like that. So as we get lost in the political component, again, not going there. I'm sure we could have that banter. I'd stand to be like educated by anyone, please. Like happy to have that conversation. Maybe. I don't expect people to understand that. I don't think you can. It's a choice. You can either choose to understand or you can just not. That's it. So this isn't about, okay, well, what's next? Because what was next for me is that I really needed to, as quickly as I could, build a bridge and move forward and let that experience go. The most difficult part about that and why one of the reasons why maybe I chose to indulge in this experience and this trauma and be so hurt by the outcome, to feel the weight of that outcome, is because people in my community, people in my friendship circle, family, when I say family, obviously not my siblings, but family, you get it. I had to reconcile with the fact that people within my community voted no, and I understand the why. I don't care about the why. That's there on them. Now I say that. That choice, that no, what that meant to me at the time, again, I've built a bridge. I had to reconcile with the fact that that choice represents their values. And I really wanted to, I would like to have just eliminated those people from my life. If this was post now and I meet people, I don't have to welcome these people into my home. Like, I don't have to connect with them. Like, that's easy, right? But when they're already in your community, you've got to reconcile with the fact that these people are in your life, in your family, in your community. Oh, how did I build a bridge over that? I just had to. And what I fought with, again, showing my maturity or lack of maturity at the time. Sorry, Lord. You just get so sick of being the better person sometimes. But you just have to be the better person and go, okay, and let it go. And I didn't want to let it go. I was like, why should I be the better person? Why should I let it go? The truth is, if I indulge, it really just reaffirms the fear that other people feel for others, for what's different, for racism, for all of it. All I do is affirm that let me just tell you, I am so much better than that. I'm not affirming that. I'm not validating that. No chance. So, yeah. So I built a bridge. But the aftermath, I'm still dealing with. Yeah. So that's episode 2. So tune in for that if you want to hear what the healing process looked like for me. And there was a healing process, let me just tell you. But it started very simply by letting go and by consciously making a decision to let go. And that's it. And I don't know if it's all fully dissipated, but the beautiful thing about having open conversations is that with open conversations, those feelings no longer hold you. So I hope that made sense. I hope people can understand a perspective, not the perspective, just a perspective, mine. Other people are going to feel differently. They might agree with components of what I've said, but obviously it's just a perspective. And the world is made up of people who have different perspectives, and that's it. Okay. So thank you very much for tuning in to this episode. It's very heavy. I hope by the end of it, you don't feel heavy and that I can leave you with the feeling that I'm okay. This doesn't own me. That experience didn't own me. I just indulged in it because I could. Simple as that. So, once again, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Unsexy Truth, striving to be the #1 mental wellness podcast for the only purpose, or for the sole purpose, of normalizing difficult conversations. I'm your host, White Owl, and I want to thank you for tuning in to help make that possible. Take care out there. Bye.